Hi, my name is Kara, and today we're going to knit the cable sweater of your dreams. This is the Williamsburg sweater. I designed it last year when I was living in Williamsburg, and now I'm back in New York and I finally made another one. So this will be a walkthrough for the Williamsburg sweaters. So in order to follow along with this tutorial, you are going to need the pattern itself, and you can get that on my website, my Ravelry, or my Etsy. And if you use code YouTube, you can get 15% off the pattern. This is a super beginner friendly pattern. If you've never done any sort of cables before, that's okay. I promise that I'll show you guys how. This pattern is knit flat and in the round. So you're going to work the panels flat, and then you're going to knit the sleeves in the round. So it does require a little bit of seaming, but I promise you it's the bare minimum. And I absolutely adore making the Williamsburg sweater. It goes so quickly and it just comes out so nicely. I make them as Christmas gifts for my friends, and it's probably the only thing that I've ever made like any of my male friends, because I don't really like knitting for men, mostly because it's usually just stockinette, it's on thinner needles, and it just takes forever. Like the sizing is just a lot bigger than what I'm used to knitting for myself, so I get bored. But when I want to make a sweater for my guy friends and I don't want to knit them a traditional men's sweater, I usually make them a Williamsburg sweater. And I've been experimenting and doing a bunch of different versions, but I find that I really like to make it a bit oversized for myself, so I tend to wear anywhere between like an extra small to a medium, and I am wearing the extra large here. So the pattern itself goes from extra small to 5X, and I'll show you guys a picture. Like, this is what it looks like when I wear an extra small, and this is what it looks like when I wear an extra large. And I promise you that this sweater will knit up so quickly, because you're knitting on 15mm needles, and it's just such a joy to see this pattern come together, because, not to toot my own horn, but it's so pretty. So today I'm going to be making my Williamsburg sweater in Cascade Yarns Magnum, and I believe this is the colorway Turtle. And this was gifted to me, and this is the first time that I've like extensively used the Magnum yarns, and I really love it, and I'm excited to explore more of their color range. So let's talk materials. So you are going to need 15mm circular needles, and they do need to be circular because you're going to be knitting the sleeves in the round. And you're also going to need a cable needle, and I like to use circular needles here as well, just because I find it's a lot easier to make the cables if you're using circular needles. And you're also going to need stitch markers, a tapestry needle, and yarn. This pattern is written for super bulky yarn, and if you don't have super bulky yarn, there is a light version which uses bulky weight yarn. How much yarn you need depends on what size you're making, and again, this pattern goes from extra small to 5X, so just read the pattern itself just to see how much yarn you'll need for your sweater. So let's talk reading the pattern itself. The pattern goes from size extra small to 5X, so there's 9 different sizes, and so I really do recommend just going through and highlighting the numbers for your size first before you even start the pattern, just to make your life a little bit easier. Additionally, this pattern is charted, so you are going to be following charts in order to make the front and the back panel. And there is a chart so you can figure out what each of the symbols mean, but just keep in mind that you're reading the chart from right to left and left to right. So you're reading the chart right to left on odd rows and left to right on even rows. Now for choosing your size, you can do whatever you want with this pattern. I would like to make it more oversized. I tend to make like extra smalls to smalls for myself normally, but I really do love the extra large size for myself in the Williamsburg sweater. So take a look at the measurements in the pattern itself and figure out what size you want to make. I would say if you want it to be more oversized for yourself, go like 3 sizes up than you normally would. And if you do want to make it a little bit longer for yourself, feel free to just repeat the rows in the chart, and I indicate in the pattern where you should repeat. But without further ado, let's get into it. So first things first, you are going to cable cast on your stitches. So I like to use cable cast on here because it's kind of my default go-to cast on, because it's not too hard, it's pretty stretchy, and it's just nice. And if you're working with a less stretchy yarn, I recommend doing a long tail cast on. But again, if you're working with a super bulky yarn, I find that it's pretty forgiving, so a cable cast on will do just fine. And first we're going to be working on the front panel, and we're going to be working it flat. So we're going to be knitting back and forth and back and forth. Okay, so we're going to take our needle and we're going to take our yarn and we're going to make a slip knot. And we're going to place that on the needle. Then we're going to take our right needle and insert it as if to knit. And then we're going to wrap our yarn and pull that stitch through. And this is only for the very first cable cast on stitch. From now on, we're just going to insert a needle between those 2 stitches, and then we're just going to wrap our yarn and pull it through and place it back on the left needle. And again, from now on, you're just going to insert your needle between those 2 last stitches. Once you've casted on all your stitches, you're just going to start with your 1x1 ribbing. So you're going to knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And if you're working with a size that has an odd number of stitches, keep in mind that on the next row, you're actually going to start with a purl stitch, and then you're going to do purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. So we've casted on all our stitches here, and now we're just going to start with our 1x1 ribbing. So I'm going to insert my needle and knit that first stitch. Then I'm going to purl the next stitches, and keep in mind that I knit continental, so this might look a little bit different than how you're doing it because you're probably going to be doing English style, so you're going to be moving the yarn tail back and forth. But here I'm just knitting, purling, purling. And the knit stitches make a V and the purl stitches make a bump as shown here. So that's a knit one, purl one. Once you finish the ribbing, you're just going to start following the charts and you're going to start working on the body. So each of the individual squares on the chart represents a single stitch. And again, remember that you're reading the charts from right to left on odd rows and left to right on even rows. Now, let's talk about cables. So I don't follow the traditional cable charting for knitting just because I found that really inaccessible and hard to read. So I kind of converted it to my own symbols and I use my own charts. So I call it cable fronts and cable backs because you're either holding the stitches to the front or holding the stitches to the back. I believe that they're technically called right or left leaning cables, but I'm just going to use the terminology of cable front and cable back. So in order to make a cable front, you are just going to place half of your stitches on your cable needle and you're going to hold those stitches to the front of your work and just going to continue to work on the rest of the stitches as you hold those stitches to the front. Then you're going to work the rest of the stitches of the cable, and then finally once you've worked those stitches, you're going to take those stitches that are on hold and knit them up. So first we're going to take our cable needle or our circular needles here, and we are going to slip those first half of the cable stitches purlwise onto the needle, and we're going to hold them on hold to the front of the work, and we're going to knit the rest of the stitches of the cable. And once we've knit those, we are going to go back to those stitches that were on hold, and we're just going to knit them as normal. It might be a little bit tight here, but just do your best not to stretch the stitches too much. And that's how you do a cable front. Cable back is very similar to a cable front, except now you're going to hold the stitches to the back of the work. So you're going to place some stitches on hold it to the back, continue to work on the stitches while holding those stitches on the back, and then once you've finished working the rest of the cable, you're just going to grab the stitches again and knit them. So first things first, we are going to work up to where we want to add in the cable, and we have our cable stitches here. There's 6 of them, and we're going to take our cable needle or our circular needles here, and we're just going to place the first half of those stitches on hold, and we're going to slip them first. So we're going to slip them onto our cable needle and then hold them to the back of the work. Then we're just going to knit the rest of the stitches in the cable. And once we've done that, we are just going to take those stitches that are on hold on the cable needle and we are going to knit those up now. And you want to be careful to make sure that you didn't twist the stitches. I did that here, so I just had to untwist them. And you're just going to knit those stitches now. And so make sure nothing's twisted and make sure you don't drop any stitches because that is pretty easy to do. And that's how you do a cable back. And that's all there is to it to cables. I promise you this pattern is super simple for cables. You're only ever going to be doing cable fronts or cable backs. Once you reach shaping the neckline of your front panel, you are just going to work the stitches of the shoulder, cast off the stitches for the neckline, and then work the stitches for the other shoulder. So we've worked up to the neckline, and now we're going to cast off the stitches in the middle, and first we got to work the stitches for the shoulder. So just work the stitches of the shoulders as they appear, and then cast off the middle stitches, and once you've casted off enough stitches in the middle, you just continue to work the stitches for the other shoulder. Once you finish shaping the neckline of the front panel, you are just going to place the front panel on hold somewhere. You can put it on another set of needles, you can put it on some scrap yarn, and you're going to start working the stitches for the back panel now. And it's going to be very similar to how you did the front panel, except you're just going to be doing the neckline a little bit differently. Once you finish knitting the back panel, you are now going to use 3-needle bind off to seam together the shoulders. First, we're going to place the panels on top of one another. So that's the front panel, this is the back panel, and we're going to make sure that the right sides are facing one another. And now we're going to make sure that the stitches for the shoulders are aligned and nothing's twisted. And we're going to use 3-needle bind off to seam them together. And I find that it's helpful to make sure that all the stitches are kind of on the edge of the needle because it's just easier to pick them up that way, and make sure your working yarn's not getting too tangled. And so we're going to take a 3rd needle, and this is a great time for you to use your cable needle if you don't have another set of like 15 millimeters anywhere. We're going to insert our needle into 1 stitch from the front and 1 stitch from the back, wrap our yarn, and then pull that yarn through both of those stitches and off the needle. We're going to repeat that step, and we're going to have 2 stitches, and then we're going to cast them off. So insert into front panel and the back panel, wrap your yarn, pull it through, and then cast off. And that's how you do 3-needle bind off. When we get to the point where we only have one stitch, we're going to cut our yarn and we're going to pass it through that last stitch. And now we're done with 3-needle bind off, and look how nice and pretty that seam looks. Once you've seamed together the shoulders, you're going to seam up the sides. So I recommend taking an interlocking stitch marker and measuring out how far down you want the arm opening to be, placing the stitch marker so that it holds together the front and the back piece, and then using that as a guideline to know where you should stop seaming up. And we're going to be using mattress stitch here in order to seam up the panels. Now for seaming the sides, we are going to take a tape measure and an interlocking stitch marker. You can also use a scrap piece of yarn as well. And we are just going to measure out how wide we want the arm opening to be. And we're going to place a stitch marker, putting together the front and the back panel just to mark where we should stop seaming. And this just lets us know where we should stop seaming so that we don't go all the way to the top, and so that we know it's nice and measured out, like, and even. Now we're going to take some yarn and we're going to thread it through a tapestry needle. Honestly, this yarn's kind of long. You really only need it to be about as long as the seam needs to be. Maybe give like about an extra 6 inches. We're going to insert our needle into the bottom V of the piece, and then we're going to start picking up stitches on the other panel. And I really recommend picking up about 1 column in from the edge just to make things neater. And on the ribbing portion, I like to pick up the purl bumps just because it's a little bit easier than picking up the V's. And you don't want to pick up stitches that are too far apart from one another, so try to go about 1 stitch per row when you're picking up each stitch from each panel. So just alternate like 1 row up, 1 row up, 1 row up from the front and the back panel. And you'll definitely see when you go too far and pick up stitches from like too many rows up, because it'll look like it's been seamed versus like being nice and like seamless looking. So just take your time and make sure that you're not pulling the yarn too much, because I find that with single ply yarn there's definitely a danger of it falling apart. So kind of be gentle with the yarn that you're seaming with as well. And once you reach the body portion as well, you're just going to pick up those purl ridges again. And again, pick up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the edge just to make things a little bit easier for you and make things neater. And you're just picking up those little purl ridges, and try to make sure that you're picking up from the same column up. And I am by no means an expert, but this is how it should turn out. Once you finish seaming up the sides, you are now going to pick up the stitches for the neckline. And I like to do the neckline before I do the sleeves just because it's easier to maneuver the sweater when you don't have sleeves on it yet versus doing it after. First, we need to pick up the stitches for the neckband. So you're going to take your needle and you're going to insert it into the back left shoulder, and you're going to moving clockwise around the neckline. And you're going to insert your needle, wrap your yarn, and then pull that stitch through to the other side. And I like to pick up stitches about 2 to 3 rows down from the very edge just to make things a little bit nicer and neater. And if you're having trouble with picking up stitches, make sure that you're picking up stitches in between the stitches and not like inserting it into yarn. And so if you are having trouble with that, I find that it's helpful to kind of pull apart the sweater a little bit and then find the gaps. And just make sure that you're picking up stitches nice and evenly, and there's going to be the right number of stitches at the very end. Once you finish picking up all the stitches for the neckline, you're going to place a stitch marker and begin to knit 1 by 1 ribbing. So that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. Once you've picked up your stitches, you're just going to place a stitch marker and you're going to begin knitting in the round 1 by 1 ribbing. So that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And you'll know where the end of the round is because of your stitch marker. And I recommend making sure that you don't accidentally drop that very first stitch just because it's the most precarious, and just kind of tightening things up after you knit the first stitch. From then on, 1 by 1 ribbing. If you want a higher neckline, I recommend doing more rows of ribbing here, but once you're done knitting the neckline, just cast off and ribbing. To cast off in pattern, you are just going to knit 1, purl 1, and then you're going to cast off. And then you'll continue to work the stitches as they appear and just cast off as you go. And if you find that there's a gap between the first stitch and the last stitch after you've cast it off, here's how I like to fix that. So on the final stitch, you're just going to cut your yarn and pass the tail through that last stitch. And we're going to use this tail to clean up that gap between the first and the last stitch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to thread our tapestry needle, and we are going to insert into the top V of the first stitch, and then we're going to insert into the top V of that last stitch. And don't pull too tight and don't pull too loose. You want to make sure that it looks nice and even. Once you finish the neckline, you're just going to pick up the stitches for the sleeve. Starting at the underarm and moving clockwise around, you're going to pick up the stitches for your sleeve. And as you're picking up the stitches for the sleeve, I recommend picking up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the very edge, just because that makes things a little bit neater. So you're going to take your needle and you're just going to insert it into the underarm, and you're going to wrap your yarn and pull that stitch through to the other side. And again, just make sure that you're picking up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the very edge, and make sure that they're evenly spaced. And this pattern also comes with an option for more fitted sleeves and very wide sleeves. I'm wearing the more fitted sleeves just because I felt like it. But in the pattern itself, I've included pictures of what it looks like when you do the wide sleeves as well. Once you finish picking up the stitches for the sleeves, you're just going to place a stitch marker and begin to knit in the round, and follow the instructions for how you should do the cable portion. And I recommend trying on your sleeves as you go just to figure out how long you want it to be, especially if you're doing a more oversized size than you would normally wear. I wear an extra large here, but I didn't make the arms necessarily the extra large length because my arms are a bit short. Once you reach your desired length for the sleeves, you're going to do a decrease round. So you're going to knit 2 together all the way across the row, and this will decrease the number of stitches you have by half. So here we have worked the sleeve for as long as we want it to be, and make sure you don't lose your stitch marker. And you're just going to insert your needle into 2 stitches and wrap your yarn and pull it through both stitches. And this is a knit 2 together. And you're just going to repeat that for the entire row. Once you've decreased your stitches, you're just going to start knitting 1 by 1 ribbing. And we're just going to do a 1 by 1 ribbing. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, all the way to the end of the row. Once you finish the cuff, you're just going to cast off loosely in pattern. If you want to stretch your cuff, you can always do a tubular bind off, but again, I find that with super bulky yarn, you don't really need that. Now just repeat for the other sleeve, and you're done. That is all there is to it, to knitting the cable sweater of your dreams. Your friends will ask you to make them for you. Your grandkids will fight over the sweater. I love, 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 love making these. I've made like so many, I can't even keep track. I'll maybe count it and let you know. But if you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to me. Thank you so much for supporting me and my patterns. I hope that you are in love with this sweater as much as I am, because I really do love making them. And this is like only the first time that I've ever made one of these in green, and I don't know why I've waited so long. Technically I did make one in a dark green, but that was a Christmas present for a friend, so it wasn't for me. But I'm so excited to get to wear this around the city because it's gonna be cold and it's so cozy and it's so pretty. But I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, happy knitting, and see ya.